I thought hitting rock bottom was watching my husband toss my life onto the driveway while the neighbors stared. I was wrong. Rock bottom was shivering in a cheap motel for 3 days, convinced I was penniless. Then a silver briefcase slammed onto the boardroom table. The girl I defended in 10th grade looked me in the eye and said I was not broke, just hidden. Grant realized too late that the trash he tossed out held the keys to his empire. My name is Briar Callahan, and the sound of my marriage ending was not a scream, but the heavy, mechanical thud of a deadbolt sliding home. I stood on the welcome mat of our pristine colonial revival in the wealthy suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was 72 degrees with a light breeze, the kind of day people in this neighborhood spent manicuring their lawns. But I was shivering uncontrollably. Grant Hale opened the bay window just an inch. He did not look angry. He looked sad, wearing that practiced expression of long-suffering patience he used when explaining simple concepts to his employees. "You are unstable, Briar," Grant said, his voice loud enough for Mrs. Gable next door to hear over her hedge clippers. "I cannot have you destroying the peace of this home anymore. Go to your mother's. Do not make a scene, or I will call the police for a wellness check. Grant, please. My medication is inside. You can't just—" He shut the window. The curtains were drawn tight. I looked down at my feet. He had tossed my life out onto the brick pavers. It was not much. A plastic bin containing my old college laptop, a few sweaters, and a cardboard box of disorganized tax receipts I had been sorting for him. To the watching world. To the neighbors peering through their blinds. The narrative was already set. I was the unemployed, hysterical wife who bled the successful CEO dry. Grant was the saint who finally had enough. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to a public park and called a legal aid hotline. The woman on the other end sounded exhausted. When I explained that Grant had a team of shark lawyers and a prenuptial agreement I barely remembered signing, her silence spoke volumes. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with pity, "if the prenup waives spousal support and the house is premarital property, you might want to look for a shelter." I hung up. I sat there and thought about my career at Brightcrest Insights. I had been a top market researcher. I was sharp. I was ambitious. Then, 6 months ago, right before a major promotion, I was part of a sudden reduction in force. Just me. I had blamed the economy. I had blamed myself. Now, a cold realization started to creep up my spine. For months. My personal email had been acting strange. Notifications about logins from unknown locations, alerts about password changes I never requested. I had brushed them off as glitches or my own forgetfulness. Now, sitting in my car with everything I owned in the trunk, those glitches felt like fingerprints. I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town that cost $45 a night and smelled of stale tobacco. My phone buzzed at midnight. It was a text from a blocked number. "Don't sign anything. 3 days from now, they will have to listen to you." I stared at the screen until it went dark. Sleep was impossible, so I opened my banking app. I expected to see 0. I did not expect to see negative numbers. My credit card, the one I kept for emergencies and rarely touched, was maxed out. There were charges for 5-star resorts in the Caribbean, luxury car rentals in Miami, and spa treatments costing $2,000 a pop. I had been clipping coupons to buy groceries while someone, somewhere, was living a life of excess in my name. Grant had posted on social media an hour ago. It was a somber photo of a sunset. The caption read, "Heartbroken. Mental illness is a silent battle. Please respect our privacy as I try to get Briar the help she refuses to accept." Underneath, our mutual friends had commented with prayer hands and heart emojis. Not one of them had called me. They had already picked a side because Grant had handed them the script. I felt a sudden, violent surge of clarity. Panic receded, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I was not crazy. I was being erased. The next morning, I drove back to the house. I needed my birth certificate and my social security card. Things Grant had likely locked in the safe, but I had to try. I pulled up to the curb. careful not to block the driveway. That was when I saw it. Tucked under the windshield wiper of my car was a plain white envelope. It had no stamp, no address. It was crisp and dry, meaning it had been placed there recently. I stepped out of the car, looking around the quiet street. The blinds in our house, his house, were still drawn. I snatched the envelope and ripped it open. Inside was a single document that made my breath catch in my throat. The document inside the envelope was heavy, printed on expensive, watermarked linen paper. It was a draft for a medical power of attorney. The name of the proposed guardian was Grant Hale. The reason listed for this necessity was my severe emotional instability and inability to make rational financial decisions. I stood on the sidewalk, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. This was not just a divorce strategy. This was a cage. If I screamed, I was unstable. If I fought back with too much aggression, I was dangerous. Grant was not just trying to leave me, he was trying to legally invalidate my existence. He was constructing a reality where my resistance would only serve as proof of my sickness. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden, from nearly 20 years ago. I was in the 10th grade. I was walking down the hallway when I saw a girl named Marin Pierce being shoved against a locker. Her books spilled everywhere. The captain of the swim team kicked her binder and laughed. "Pick it up, trash." He had sneered. Most people looked away, but I did not. I had walked over, knelt down, and helped her gather her scattered papers. Marin did not cry. She had looked at me with eyes that were dry and terrifyingly focused. "Thank you, Briar," she had said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "One day, I will make them read every single word." I had not understood what she meant back then. Standing in front of the house I was barred from entering, I finally understood. The details mattered. The fine print was where they buried the bodies. I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app again. I forced myself to look past the red negative balance on my personal account and scrolled down. There, at the very bottom of the screen, was a linked account I had never seen before. It was labeled LMN Consulting. It was a business account, opened under my Social Security number, with a balance of 0 but a transaction history that stretched back 6 months. I dialed the bank's customer service line immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. I need to report a fraudulent account opened in my name. I told the representative, "Certainly, ma'am, for security. I need you to answer your challenge question. What was the name of your first pet, Buster?" I said instantly. "I am sorry, that is incorrect." I froze. "That is impossible. It has always been Buster. Would you like to try the second question?" "What is your mother's maiden name?" "Vance." I said, "I am sorry. Ma'am, that is also incorrect. For your security, I have to lock this profile due to multiple failed attempts. You will need to visit a branch in person with 2 forms of identification." The line went dead. I sat on the curb, the cold concrete seeping through my jeans. I let my mind drift back over the last 3 years. It was a timeline of bad luck that I had accepted as fate. The job offer from that boutique firm that was rescinded the day before I was supposed to start. The application for the downtown apartment that was rejected despite my good credit score. The important tax documents from the IRS that never arrived in the mail. It had not been bad luck. Grant always volunteered to handle the boring administrative stuff. And his mother, Judith Hale, was always the one who collected the mail because she insisted on walking her corgi past our house every morning at 10 o'clock. I could see her now in my mind, wearing her wide-brimmed gardening hat, smiling as she sifted through our letters, sliding the ones that mattered into her oversized tote bag. They had been curating my reality for years. They had been intercepting my life before it could even reach me. I needed help. I could not use the family lawyer, and I could not trust anyone Grant knew. I opened a browser and searched for aggressive divorce attorneys, Charlotte. I found a man named Robert Thorne with 5-star reviews and a reputation for being nasty. I filled out the contact form for an emergency consultation the next morning. 5 minutes later, my phone pinged. It was an email notification. Subject: cancellation of appointment. I frowned and opened it. The email was from my account, sent to Robert Thorne's office. Dear Mr. Thorne, please disregard my previous request. I am having a manic episode and my husband is handling my care. I do not need legal representation at this time. I dropped the phone on the grass as if it were a burning coal. I had not sent that email. I was holding the phone, yet someone else was inside it. Grant was not just in the house. He was in my pocket, in my history, and he was typing my surrender for me. I realized then that I did not just need a lawyer. I needed a war room. I drove straight to a cramped apartment in downtown Charlotte, the home of Marcus, an old colleague from my early days at Brightcrest. He was a freelance cybersecurity analyst who worked in the dark, usually fueled by energy drinks and paranoia. I put my laptop and phone on his coffee table and told him to find the leak. Marcus typed furiously for 10 minutes before he spun his chair around. His face was pale. Briar, you are not just hacked. You are mirrored. He pointed to a line of code on his monitor. See this. There is a ghost device synced to your iCloud. Every text you get, every email, every photo you take, it copies to a tablet instantly. But look at the authentication log. I leaned in. The device had been authorized via a 2-factor authentication code sent to my phone number. I never got that code. I said, You did not get it because your SIM was cloned. Marcus explained, tapping the screen. Look at the date, November 12th. Does that ring a bell? A chill went down my spine. That was the weekend we went to visit Grant's parents at the lake. My phone had lost service for 6 hours. Grant had told me it was just tower maintenance in the rural area. It had been a lie. He had swapped my service to an electronic SIM card on another device just long enough to authorize the spy tablet, then switched it back before I noticed. There is more, Marcus said, pulling up a device history log. I accessed the metadata of the documents you said were forged. This medical power of attorney was printed at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning on a Tuesday last month. The printer serial number matches a high-end laser model registered to your home network. I was at the office that night, I said, my voice rising. I was overseeing the focus group results for the beverage account. I have time cards. I have witnesses. Exactly, Marcus said. So who was at your house printing legal documents in the middle of the night? I dug through the chaotic box of papers I had managed to salvage from the driveway. I found a crumbled receipt for a certified letter from the IRS, supposedly signed by me. I smoothed it out on the table. The signature said Briar Callahan, but the slant was wrong. I write with a hard right tilt. This signature leaned backward. I grabbed my phone and called the local post office branch listed on the stamp. I put on my most frantic, authoritative voice, claiming identity theft and demanding they check the security footage for that specific tracking number timestamp. The manager, terrified by my mention of a police report, checked the tape while I held the line. Well, ma'am, the manager said hesitantly, it appears to be a woman signing for it. She is wearing a large sun hat and, well, she looks quite elderly. Judith, my mother-in-law. She had been intercepting my tax notices, signing my name with the casual ease of someone autographing a birthday card, all while smiling at me over Sunday brunch. Marcus called me back to the screen. Briar, look at your tax transcripts. There is a limited liability company registered in your name, LMN Consulting. I stared at the address line. It was not our house. It was the address of Grant's executive suite at Hale Meridian. He is running a business through me. I realized the horror setting in. He is washing money or hiding assets, and he put my name on the deed so if it blows up, I go to jail. Marcus kept digging. He breached the server of a headhunter firm I had applied to last year. He found an email sent from an address that looked like mine but had one letter different. It was sent to the HR director. Subject: withdrawal of application. Body: I am withdrawing my candidacy. I am currently struggling with severe stress and cannot handle a high-pressure environment. I felt sick. I had not been rejected. I had been sabotaged. Grant had been methodically cutting the safety nets out from under me, ensuring that when he finally discarded me, I would have nowhere to land. I picked up my phone and dialed Grant. He answered on the second ring. "I know about the ghost tablet." "Grant," I said, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "I know about the SIM swap. I know about LMN Consulting." There was a pause, and then a low, dismissive chuckle. "Briar, honey, you sound hysterical. Have you been taking your pills? I am going to bury you," I said. "With what money?" Grant laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "You are destitute. You have no job, no credit, and no credibility. You do not even have enough money to pay the filing fee for a lawsuit. Go to a shelter. Briar, disappear before you embarrass yourself further." He hung up. I stood there in the dim light of Marcus's apartment, shaking with rage. Then, my laptop screen lit up with a new notification. It was an email from Board Secretary Hale Meridian Holdings. To Briar Callahan, subject notice of emergency board meeting. I frowned. I had never worked for Hale Meridian. I opened the email. "Dear Ms. Callahan, as the beneficial owner of the majority voting block, your attendance is required at the emergency session tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I stared at the words. I was not just a wife being erased. I was something else entirely. And Grant had forgotten the one rule of business he used to preach: never leave a paper trail you cannot burn. The headquarters of Hale Meridian Holdings was a fortress of glass and steel that pierced the skyline of uptown Charlotte. I walked into the lobby wearing the same blazer I had slept in, my hair pulled back into a severe knot. I felt small against the towering marble pillars, but the anger burning in my chest kept my spine straight. I approached the security desk. The guard looked at his tablet and then back at me with a bored expression. "I am sorry." "Ma'am," he said, "I do not have a Briar Callahan on the guest list for the board meeting. You will need to leave. Check again," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "I have checked. Please step back or I will have to—" "She is not on the list." A voice cut through the air, sharp and precise. "She is the list." I turned. Walking toward us was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice and expensive tailoring. She wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, and her heels clicked against the marble with a rhythmic, predatory cadence. It took me a moment to recognize the eyes behind the designer glasses. Marin Pierce. The scared girl from the 10th grade hallway was gone. In her place was a weapon. "Marin," I whispered. She did not smile. She just nodded once, a gesture of professional acknowledgement. "Follow me. Briar. We are late." We took the private elevator to the top floor. When the doors slid open, we walked straight into the main conference room. The conversation inside died instantly. Grant was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, looking every inch the master of the universe, until he saw Marin. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. Next to him, Judith was clutching her pearl necklace so tightly I thought the string might snap. Marin did not say a hello. She walked to the opposite end of the table and set a silver briefcase down. Click, click. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Who let you in?" Grant demanded, standing up. "This is a closed session. Sit down." "Grant," Marin said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. She opened her laptop and connected it to the room's main projector. A chart appeared on the screen. It was a complex web of shell companies and trusts, all leading back to a single name in the center: Briar Callahan, beneficial owner. "What is this?" I asked, staring at my name in bold letters. I don't know anything about this." "Correct," Marin said, looking at Grant. "That is exactly why they chose you." She turned to the confused board members. 10 years ago, Ms. Callahan worked as a strategic researcher for a small startup called Nexus Stream. As part of her compensation package, she was given founder-level stock options. She thought they were worthless paper. But 3 years later, Nexus Stream was quietly acquired and merged into Hale Meridian. I gasped. I remembered those papers. I had thrown them in a drawer and forgotten them. Those shares did not disappear. Marin continued. They converted. And because of the unique structuring of the merger, they carried supervoting rights. Grant Hale discovered this before they got married. He realized that the woman he was dating was technically the largest individual shareholder of his own company. Grant was sweating now. This is preposterous. Those shares were transferred, forged. Marin cut him off. She tapped a key, and a new document appeared. It was a transfer of voting rights, signed by me, but Marin zoomed in on the metadata. This document was digitally signed using a key that originated from Grant's laptop while Breyer was in surgery for her appendicitis 2 years ago. We have the IP logs. Judith let out a small, strangled sound. Marin was relentless. She pulled up a chain of emails between Grant and the company's former general counsel. The subject line read, Narrative Control, Asset Protection. Read the second paragraph. Marin instructed the room. I read it, and my stomach turned over. Keep the pressure on her. If she feels unstable, she won't question the paperwork. We need to frame her anxiety as incapacity to manage the estate. Get Judith to intercept the proxy statements. He used your shares as collateral to secure the expansion loans that built this building, Marin said, looking at me. He built his empire on your back, Breyer, and he convinced you that you were too weak to even stand up. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector fan. The board members were looking at Grant with a mixture of horror and calculation. Marin closed her laptop with a snap. She looked Grant dead in the eye, under the corporate bylaws. If the beneficial owner proves fraud in the proxy chain, the voting rights revert immediately. Breyer. She turned to me. If you activate this clause right now, you control 51% of the voting stock. And Grant loses his seat as CEO in 24 hours. Grant shot up from his chair, his face flushed a deep, ugly red. He pointed a trembling finger at Marin, but his eyes were fixed on the board members, desperate to regain control of the narrative. She is being manipulated, Grant shouted, his voice cracking. Breyer doesn't understand any of this. Look at her. She is overwhelmed. She has no background in finance. This lawyer is twisting facts to confuse a woman who is already mentally fragile. It was the same song he had been singing for years. Breyer is confused. Breyer doesn't get it. Let the men handle it. Marin did not even blink. She simply pressed a key on her laptop. A voice recording filled the room, crisp and undeniable. It was a phone call. This is Judith Hale speaking as the legal representative for Breyer Callahan, the voice on the recording said. It was my mother-in-law's voice, but stripped of the syrupy sweetness she used in public. It was cold, clinical, and ruthless. My daughter-in-law is, well, she is not sufficiently competent to authorize these transfers. She lacks the capacity to understand risk. We need to bypass her signature protocol for her own safety. I stared at Judith. She sat frozen, her hand covering her mouth as if to stuff the words back inside. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had not just stolen my money. Money can be earned back. They had stolen my agency. They had systematically dismantled my reputation and my legal identity to turn me into a ghost in my own life. I was not a partner to them. I was a hostage. That is out of context, Grant yelled, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. Is this out of context, too? Marin asked. She pulled a document from her briefcase and slid it down the long table toward the chairman of the board. This is the prenuptial agreement Breyer signed 7 years ago. And this. She slid a second document next to it. Is the version filed with the court during the divorce proceedings initiated 3 days ago. The chairman adjusted his glasses. There is an addendum here on page 14, he muttered. waiving all rights to intellectual property and derivative assets. That addendum is a forgery, Marin stated calmly. Hand a sloppy one. She projected a forensic analysis onto the screen. 2 columns of data appeared. The original file hash matches the date of the wedding, Marin explained, using her laser pointer. But the version Grant filed. The metadata shows it was modified and resaved on October 4th of last year at 3 in the afternoon. Breyer. Where were you on October 4th? I remembered that day perfectly. It was etched into my memory in acid. I was at the hospital, I said, my voice gaining strength. My mother had just suffered a stroke. I was sitting by her bedside all day. Exactly, Marin said. You were holding your dying mother's hand while Grant was sitting in his home office, digitally cutting and pasting a clause to rob you blind. Every head in the room turned to look at Grant. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Judith let out a sob, a sharp, theatrical sound intended to draw sympathy. I only wanted to protect my son, Judith wailed, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. I was trying to save him from a woman who is clearly unstable. I did what any mother would do. Something inside me snapped. The fear that had paralyzed me for days evaporated, leaving only cold, hard precision. You were protecting your son, I asked, looking directly at the woman who had criticized my cooking and my clothes for a decade. Is that why you opened a credit card in my name? Did you protect him by maxing out the limit to pay for your facelift last November? Judith's jaw dropped. The fake tears stopped instantly. I don't know what you are talking about, she stammered. Marin didn't miss a beat. She flashed a credit card statement on the screen. Dr. Sterling's Plastic Surgery Clinic, $12,000, paid for by a card issued to Breyer Callahan, mailed to a P.O. box registered to Judith Hale. Marin continued, scrolling through a forensic accounting report that looked like an autopsy of their greed. And here, we have the rent payments for the shell company offices. And here are 25 separate transfers to an anonymous digital wallet. Interestingly, the timestamps of these transfers align perfectly with the hours Grant was supposedly at the golf club every Sunday. Grant looked at the screen, then at the board members who were now whispering furiously among themselves. He looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The master of the universe was dissolving, and underneath was just a small, terrified thief. His shoulders slumped. He walked around to the table, ignoring his mother, and stopped a few feet from me. He lowered his voice to that soft, intimate pitch he used when he wanted me to apologize for things I hadn't done. Breyer, baby, he whispered, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching me. This is getting out of hand. These people, they don't understand us. Can we just go to my office and talk privately? Just you and me. We can fix this. I looked at his sweating forehead and his shaking hands. For the first time in years, I saw him clearly. He wasn't asking for a truce because he loved me. He wasn't asking for privacy to save our marriage. He was asking because he was terrified. No. Grant, I said, and my voice did not shake. We are done talking in private. We discovered the next piece of Grant's puzzle not in a hidden offshore account, but on a public real estate listing in Raleigh. It was a renovated warehouse called the Lantern Yard. It was a beautiful space, a co-working hub dedicated to local nonprofits and job training programs for at-risk youth. And according to the deed Marin pulled up on the screen, I owned every brick of it. Grant had not just hidden money there. He had built a moral trap. It is a human shield, Marin said, her voice devoid of emotion as she scanned the tenant list. If you try to liquidate this asset to get your liquidity back, the headlines write themselves. Greedy ex-wife evicts, charities to fund divorce. He wants you to look like a monster so the court feels righteous about granting him guardianship. We called the building manager, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who sounded terrified when she heard my name. Mrs. Callahan. Oh, Bless your heart, Mrs. Gable stammered over the speakerphone. We have been praying for you. When Mrs. Hale told us about your condition, we all agreed to the rent increase immediately. We just wanted to help with your medical bills. I felt the blood drain from my face. What did my mother-in-law tell you? She said you had lost your ability to speak, Mrs. Gable said, her voice thick with sympathy. She said you were trapped in your own mind and needed 24-hour care. That is why we did not complain when the rent went up 30% last quarter. We thought we were paying for your nurses. I muted the phone and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. I felt physically ill. Judith had not just stolen my money, she had monetized my silence. She had turned me into a tragedy to squeeze extra cash out of people who were trying to save the world. Mrs. Gable, I said, unmuting the line, my voice steady but quiet. I am speaking to you now. I am not sick, and I did not authorize that rent increase. After we hung up, Marin outlined the counter-move. We do not sell the building, Marin said. We set up an independent escrow account. We notify the tenants that their old rent rates are reinstated immediately, but all payments go to this new secure account. We cut off Grant's cash flow without hurting the community. We turn his shield into your fortress. Grant did not take this well. By noon, articles began appearing on local business blogs and gossip sites. The narrative had shifted. It was no longer just about me being unstable. Now, I was being manipulated. Is the Callahan estate being looted by a predatory attorney? One headline screamed. The article claimed that a confused Briar Callahan had fallen under the spell of a greedy lawyer who was isolating her from her loving family to drain the estate. They were trying to paint Marin as the villain to invalidate everything we were doing. He is desperate, Marin said, reading the article on her tablet. He is trying to bait me into a public fight so he can claim I am unprofessional. Who gave them this? I asked. Grant. No, Marin said, pointing to a specific detail in the article about a pending merger that only a few people knew about. Grant is too careful to leak inside information that could hurt the stock price. This came from the CFO. I stared at her. Why would his chief financial officer leak this? Because he wants to switch sides, Marin said with a dark smile. He sees the ship sinking. He is leaking the predatory lawyer story to keep Grant happy for today. But he included the merger detail as a signal to us that he knows where the bodies are buried. He is hedging his bets. My phone rang. It was a producer from a popular business podcast, The Charlotte Exchange. They wanted me to come on air to tell my side of the story and clear up the rumors about my health. I looked at Marin. It was tempting. I wanted to scream the truth to the world. Do not do it, Marin warned, closing my laptop. It is a trap. Briar. They want you on air so they can ask rapid-fire questions, confuse you, and make you get emotional. If you cry, if you stumble, if you sound even a little bit angry, Grant will play that clip in court as proof that you are unhinged. So I just stay silent, I asked, frustration bubbling up in my chest. I let them call me crazy. We do not fight with words, Marin said firmly. We fight with paper. You are going to see a forensic psychiatrist tomorrow, independent, court-approved, and then we are going to an auditor. I nodded, swallowing the urge to defend myself publicly. I realized that in this war, silence was not weakness. Silence was the sound of a weapon loading. We moved into a temporary office space in a high-rise downtown, a room with walls of white dry erase boards and lighting that felt as cold and sterile as an operating theater. This was not a law firm. It was a siege engine. Marin had assembled a squad that looked less like lawyers and more like assassins. There was a forensic accountant who tracked hidden assets for the government, a handwriting expert who could spot a tremor in a signature from a mile away, and a data recovery specialist who treated hard drives like crime scenes. Emotions are liabilities, Marin told me as she pinned a timeline to the wall. In that courtroom tomorrow, you do not have feelings. You have data points. You do not say you were sad. You say that on November 4th at 6 in the evening. Your access to the joint account was revoked without notice. I spent hours relearning how to speak. I stripped the adjectives from my sentences until all that remained were nouns, verbs, and timestamps. I was turning the wreckage of my life into a dossier that could not be broken. During the data review, the tech specialist found a folder on a cloud server linked to Judith called the Risk Assessment. It was a log, a detailed, terrifyingly petty log of my entire existence for the last 2 years. June 12th. Briar cried for 10 minutes after dropping a plate. Signs of instability. August 3rd. Briar declined dinner invitation. Antisocial behavior escalating. September 9th. Briar forgot to pick up dry cleaning. Cognitive decline. They had been watching me like a lab rat, documenting every moment of exhaustion or sadness to build a case that I was losing my mind. Look at this date, Marin said, tapping a document near the bottom of the pile. It was a draft for an emergency guardianship petition. The filing date was pre-filled for tomorrow. They were never going to wait, Marin said, her voice hard. The plan was to divorce you on Monday, isolate you on Tuesday and Wednesday, and file for guardianship on Thursday. They wanted you homeless and hysterical so that when they walked into court, you would look exactly like the crazy woman they described. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Grant. I hear you are in trouble. I can still save you if you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Don't let that lawyer ruin you. Come home. I looked at the screen, feeling a phantom pull to the safety he was offering, the lie that it could all go back to normal. Marin saw the text. She didn't tell me to ignore it. Instead, she looked at me with a softness I had not seen since high school. Do you remember why the swim team captain shoved me that day? She asked. No, I admitted. I reported that he had stolen the answer key for the chemistry final. Marin said. Everyone called me a rat. They said I was jealous. You were the only one who didn't tell me to shut up. You handed me a tissue and said, "Don't stay silent." She adjusted her glasses. You saved me from being silenced that day, Briar. Now I am returning the favor. I picked up my phone and blocked Grant's number. Let's file the motions, I said. We launched our offensive at 4 in the afternoon. We filed emergency injunctions to freeze every asset connected to Hale Meridian, requested a restraining order against Grant and Judith based on financial abuse, and demanded a court seal on all office computers to prevent the deletion of logs. We were not asking for permission anymore. We were dropping a net. That night, just as we were packing up, a courier arrived with a package addressed to me. It was marked personal and confidential. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper titled Settlement Agreement and Admission of Care. It was a contract. It stated that if I admitted to having delusional episodes and agreed to check into a private facility chosen by the Hale family, Grant would pay off my credit card debt and give me a small monthly allowance. It was not a settlement. It was a trap. If I signed it, I would be legally confessing to insanity. If I showed it to the court, they would claim it was a compassionate offer to a sick woman. I looked at the paper, then at the shredder in the corner of the room. Don't shred it, Marin said, stopping my hand. We keep it. It proves they are terrified of what you are going to say tomorrow. I placed the paper in my evidence file. I was done being the victim. Tomorrow, I would be the witness. Grant intercepted me right before I reached the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. He did not look like a man facing a financial execution. He looked like a concerned husband. He reached out and grabbed my elbow, his grip firm but gentle, the exact pressure he used to guide me through parties where I felt out of place. Briar, look at you, Grant said, his voice dripping with curated sympathy. You are shaking. You are exhausted. You do not have to go in there and let them tear you apart. Let me handle this. I can make it all go away. For years, that tone had been my lullaby. It was the sound of safety. Today, it sounded like a lock clicking shut. I pulled my arm away, not with violence, but with a deliberate slowness that made him blink. You are not worried about me. Grant, I said, looking him straight in the eyes. You are worried about what I know. He opened his mouth to argue, but the bailiff opened the doors. We walked in. Judith was already inside, sitting in the front row. The moment she saw the judge enter, she transformed. Her posture slumped, her hands clasped a damp tissue, and she let out a soft, shuddering breath that echoed in the quiet room. Your Honor, Judith pleaded as soon as proceedings began, standing up despite her lawyer trying to restrain her. Please, I am begging you to protect her. My daughter-in-law is not well. She is a danger to herself. We only want to get her the help she refuses to take. It was a masterful performance. If I had not lived through the cruelty behind the curtain, I might have believed her myself. Marin stood up. She did not shout. She simply walked to the evidence table and placed a stack of papers down with a heavy thud. Your Honor, Marin said, the only danger Mrs. Callahan faces is the systematic destruction of her reputation by these two individuals. We have here a series of emails sent from Mr. Hale's private server to the human resources departments of 3 major firms in Charlotte. They contain fabricated reports of manic episodes and warnings not to hire Briar Callahan due to unpredictability. Marin paused, then held up a file folder. And this is a document found on Mrs. Hale's cloud drive titled Emotional Trigger Points. It is a guide on how to induce anxiety in the petitioner to ensure compliance. The judge frowned, looking from the papers to Grant. Then came the final blow. The doors at the back of the room opened, and a young man walked in. It was Miles, Grant's former executive assistant. He looked terrified, clutching a USB drive like a lifeline. He had taken the immunity deal. Marin plugged the drive in. On the courtroom monitors, a chat log appeared. It was a conversation between Grant and Miles dated 2 weeks ago. Grant divorce papers are served. She is a wreck. Miles. What if she fights Grant? She won't. She has no money. Once she breaks down, we file for guardianship. Easy. The word easy hung on the screen, glowing in neon green. Grant stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. He looked at the judge, whose expression had turned to stone. Then, in a moment of pure panic, Grant pointed a shaking finger at his mother. She told me to do it, Grant shouted, his voice cracking. It was her plan. She said Briar was a liability to the merger. Judith's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with betrayal. You liar. You ungrateful liar. I did this to save your company because you were too incompetent to manage the debt order. The judge banged his gavel, but the damage was done. I watched them turn on each other. The elegant facade of the Hale family shattered, revealing the ugly, desperate mechanics underneath. For a second, I felt a pang of sorrow, not for them, but for the years I had wasted trying to please these people, thinking their cruelty was my failure, but I did not cry. I stood up and walked to the podium. My hands were steady. Mrs. Callahan, the judge said, looking at me with a new intensity. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? I do. Your Honor? I said. My voice was clear. I am not confused. I am not manic. I am a woman who discovered that her husband and mother-in-law were using her involuntary commitment as a business strategy to cover their embezzlement. I am here to reclaim my name. The judge leaned forward. I am going to ask you a series of questions to determine your capacity right now. What is today's date? It is Tuesday, the 27th of May. I answered. What is the current value of the assets in question? The trust holds $4 million in vested equities, and the real estate portfolio is valued at $2 million, I said without hesitation. And why are you here to prove that I am not a patient? I said, I am the plaintiff. The judge nodded slowly. He looked at Grant, who was now slumped in his chair, and then back at me. The court finds no evidence of incapacity. The judge ruled, his voice cutting through the room. The motion for guardianship is dismissed with prejudice. We will proceed immediately to the allegations of fraud." Grant looked up, and for the first time, he realized the script had been burned. I was not the crazy ex-wife anymore. I was the one holding the match. The hearing shifted gears with the mechanical precision of a bear trap snapping shut. What had begun as a guardianship dispute dissolved instantly into a federal fraud inquiry the moment the representative from Sovereign Trust Bank took the stand. He was a nervous man who wiped his forehead with a handkerchief every few seconds. "Mr. Henderson," Marin asked, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Did you verify Briar Callahan's digital signature on the loan documents authorized last November? The system flagged them as potential forgeries." "Mr. Henderson admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "The geolocation of the signing device did not match the client's known location. Then why did you approve the loan of $4 million? He looked at Judith Hale, who was sitting in the front row, pale as a sheet. "Because Mrs. Hale called me. She threatened to pull the entire Hale Meridian commercial portfolio from our bank if I did not expedite the process. She said her daughter-in-law was having a bad day and just needed the paperwork done." The judge looked at Judith, the facade of the weeping. Concerned mother had evaporated. In its place sat a woman who looked like she was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Marin did not stop to gloat. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, pursuant to the bylaws of the Hale Meridian Trust, any proven act of fraud by the trustee triggers an immediate clawback clause. As of this moment, the voting rights for 51% of the company revert to the beneficial owner. That is Briar Callahan." Grant stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You cannot do that. The company needs stability. The company needs a purge." Marin replied. She turned to the back of the room where the chief financial officer, Mr. Sterling, was sitting. He had been smirking earlier, thinking his leak to the press had bought him immunity. "Officer," Marin said, nodding to the bailiff and handing him a thick file, "we have evidence that Mr. Sterling did not just follow orders. He skimmed 2% of every fraudulent transfer into a private offshore account. He is not a whistleblower. He is a co-conspirator." Mr. Sterling's smirk vanished. He was handcuffed before he could even stand up fully. The courtroom buzzed with the energy of a disaster unfolding in real time. Grant, realizing the walls were closing in, played his final desperate card. He checked his phone and looked at me with a sneer that was almost triumphant. "It is too late," Grant hissed across the aisle. "Check the news. Briar, everyone knows you are evicting the charities from the Lantern Yard. By the time you get back to the office, the public outcry will force the board to remove you." I looked at him calmly. I anticipated that. "Grant." Marin handed a document to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a notarized agreement signed at 8 o'clock this morning by Mrs. Callahan and the tenant committee of the Lantern Yard. It establishes a permanent escrow account. The tenants are staying. Their rent is frozen at the original rate, and all payments now bypass Hale Meridian to go directly into a community maintenance fund." Grant froze. I had not just blocked his punch, I had broken his wrist. "She is lying." Judith screamed, losing all composure. "She is incompetent. She does not understand business." Marin pressed play on her laptop. The courtroom speakers blasted a recording of the call Judith had made to the bank. "Listen to me, you idiot," Judith's recorded voice said, cold and hard as steel, sounding nothing like the fragile grandmother she pretended to be. "Briar is a non-factor. She signs what we put in front of her. If she asks questions, we medicate her. Just clear the funds." The silence that followed was absolute. Grant looked around the room. He saw the disgusted face of the judge, the terrified look of his mother, and the cold, impassive stare of the woman he had married. He slammed his fist onto the defense table. "Stop looking at me like that," he roared at me, his veins bulging in his neck. "I did what I had to do. You were never supposed to be involved in the operations. She doesn't need to know. She just needs to be good. The echo of his words hung in the air. She just needs to be good. It was not an opinion. It was a confession of intent. He had not wanted a wife. He had wanted a compliant asset. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression grim. Mr. Hale? Sit down. Grant collapsed into his chair, breathing hard, realizing too late that he had just screamed his motive into the court record. I am granting the permanent restraining order, the judge stated, signing the order with a sharp scratch of his pen. I am also referring this entire file to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation regarding fraud, identity theft, and coercive control. Grant looked up at me, his eyes full of venom. I will sue you, he threatened, his voice shaking with impotent rage. I will sue you for sabotaging the company. You are burning it to the ground. I stood up, gathering my files. I am not burning it. Grant, I said quietly. I am just turning on the lights. The emergency board meeting at Hale Meridian felt less like a corporate gathering and more like a second trial, only this time, I was the one holding the gavel. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table as the interim chairwoman. In front of me lay a thick stack of verified affidavits, and to my right sat Marin, her hands resting on top of her silver briefcase. Grant walked in 10 minutes late. He tried to project confidence, flashing a strained smile at the confused board members, but the sweat glistening on his forehead gave him away. He stopped at the foot of the table and looked at me with a mixture of pity and arrogance. Briar, honey, he said, shaking his head, you are out of your depth. You cannot do this. You do not know how to run a company. I did not blink. You are wrong. Grant, I did this when I had nothing. Imagine what I can do now that I have the truth. Marin stood up. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a single red folder document. It was the final nail in the coffin. This, Marin announced to the room, is a draft contract for something called Project Exodus. It outlines a plan to sell off the core assets of Hale Meridian to a shell company in the Caymans. The plan was to strip the company of value, transfer the cash offshore, and leave the remaining debt structure totaling $15 million assigned to the personal guarantee of the majority shareholder. The board members gasped. The majority shareholder was me. Then the full, sickening reality hit me. The twist was not that Grant wanted to leave me because I was a financial burden. He had filed for divorce to isolate me. He needed me to be alone, terrified, and legally declared incompetent so that his mother could sign off on transferring that debt to my name. He did not throw me away because I was broken. He broke me so he could use the pieces to build his escape raft. This is a lie, Grant shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. It is a forensic fact, I said, my voice steady. Grant Hale, pursuant to the morality clause in your contract and evidence of gross fiduciary fraud, you are hereby terminated from the position of CEO effective immediately. I turned to the rest of the board. We are keeping the operational staff. The engineers and the support teams are innocent. We will not let them pay for the sins of management. Grant stood there stunned as I signed the next document. It was an agreement Marin had negotiated with the bank an hour ago. We agreed to separate the fraudulent loans from the legitimate company assets. The bank, terrified of a public scandal involving a predatory lending scheme against a vulnerable woman, had agreed to cooperate fully to mitigate their damages. The final blow came from the community. A representative from the lantern yard stood up in the back of the room. She presented a sworn statement signed by 50 tenants confirming that Judith Hale had solicited donations based on the lie that I was institutionalized. That lie was now the evidence that would destroy Judith's social standing and open her up to fraud charges. Grant realized the game was over. He turned and bolted for the door. I followed him out into the hallway. He was frantically pressing the button for the glass elevators, the same spot where he had once told me I was embarrassing him by breathing too loudly. He spun around, his eyes wild. "Briar, listen to me. We can make a deal. I will sign a silence agreement. I will go away. You do not want a trial. It will be messy." "No," I said, and for the first time in years, I felt completely light. "I do not want your silence anymore. Grant, you do not need to be quiet. You need to take responsibility." The elevator doors chimed and slid open. But instead of an empty car, 2 officers from the district attorney's office stepped out. "Grant Hale," one officer said, stepping forward. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit forgery." Grant looked at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. They handcuffed him right there in front of the glass wall overlooking the city he thought he owned. As they led him away, he looked small. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had underestimated the woman he tried to erase. I walked back into the boardroom. It was empty now, except for Marin. I walked to the window and looked out at Charlotte. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. Marin walked up beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You saved me back in high school, Briar," she said softly. "But today, you saved yourself." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I think we are even." I walked back to the head of the table, closed my laptop with a definitive snap, and walked out the door. No one was writing the script of my life anymore but me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are tuning in from. I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.